What if we worked with criminals to make society safer? When you hear the word criminal, what image comes to mind? Growing up, I only ever had reference to The Shawshank Redemption, Prison Break, or most recently, Orange is the New Black. In fact, I thought prisoners and criminals were this tall, with bald head, a scar down the face, missing the teeth, and the words love and hate tattooed on their knuckles. That's what I thought a typical criminal was, until I went to prison. Growing up, I had everything I ever wanted in life. And by the time I was 21 years old, I'd started my own business, I was studying at university, I'd received hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of investment, all sorts of awards and accolades. Richard Branson even supported me and my idea. However, by the time I was 22, faced with crippling debt, I made the choice, the idiotic choice, to sell drugs. I was arrested and put in the police cells for 18 hours. In the police cells, I had water, I had a blanket, I had food, I had a toilet. I was okay. However, my parents, who had their homes raided by police officers early that morning, were not. Can you imagine being in their position, wondering what they must be going through? The fear, the upset, the disappointment. Imagine how you'd feel in that situation. I feel my parents might have had it worse because my mum was a police officer and my dad a retired drugs investigator. That bit's not meant to be funny. And when I was released from the prison cells, from the police cells, who were the first people to pick me up? It was my parents. I was rightfully sentenced to 28 months in prison. And my first and only reference of prison, as I've told you, is The Shawshank Redemption. I thought I was too delicate to go to prison. It doesn't help that my cellmate was called Mr. Big. And when inside, I expected to find anger, hatred, animosity, danger. But what I found were men leaving their prison cells every morning, going to a workshop, going to education, and bettering themselves. They wanted to improve their life. They wanted to turn their life around because people were in there for a whole range of reasons. Yes, people go to prison for greed, but the most part is people go to prison due to poor mental health or addiction. They commit crimes based on that. And when I was released from prison, I wanted to do something. So I started an organization that supports people with criminal convictions to secure employment and turn their back on crime for good. The biggest barrier to people with convictions turning their life around is hopelessness. They do not believe a society will welcome them back. They do not believe they will get a job, that they will secure accommodation. So why bother? And when I found that in England, almost 1 in 2 people reoffend within 12 months from their release from prison, I knew we had a real problem. So I started to look out to the rest of the world to find a solution to our crime problem. What if we brought together the best bits of all the criminal justice sectors across the world and put them into one, the ultimate rehabilitative criminal justice sector? Well, today, we're going to do just that. As a group, we're going to go through the 5 stages of the criminal justice sector, starting with breaking the law, going through to being imprisoned in Norway, coming to the end of your sentence in Brazil, being released to Singapore, where you'll be welcomed by your community, before securing employment in England. I'm really excited to bring these parts together. So shall we begin our worldwide journey? Conveniently, we're already in Portugal. So all we have to do is break the law. Who wants to go first? No? Well, it might actually be harder than I think, because only recently, Portugal was crowned the 3rd most peaceful country in the world. And I think that deserves a round of applause for Portugal. And Portugal has really led the way twice in criminal justice reform. The first time is that Portugal was the first country in the world to abolish the life sentence. The maximum imprisonable time in Portugal is now 25 years. And that absolutely shifts the thinking of a prison. No longer do we chuck people in prison and throw away the key. We need to be thinking about rehabilitation from day one. And removing the life sentence means that people may be released one day, and we need to rehabilitate them if they are going to become members of our society. The second innovation in Portugal, and probably one of the greatest it's given to the world, was in 2001, when Portugal decriminalised drug use. I could tell you it's great that imprisonment for drug-related offences has fallen by 40% in that time, and that's brilliant. But it's nothing. It is nothing compared to the amount of lives saved. And since 1999, drug-related overdose deaths have fallen by 80%. 80%. This equates to an average of 315 lives saved per year. It gives 315 people the opportunity to get help before it's too late. What if we had a criminal justice system that saw drug use as a healthcare problem, not a criminal problem, and treat it as such? So we've broken the law in Portugal. We now need to be sentenced and imprisoned. And we're going to be sentenced and imprisoned in Norway. Norway is leading the way on prisons and imprisonment and rehabilitation. Norway's maximum sentence is 21 years, bar a few offences for crimes against humanity. Most people will serve 14 years, but the government has every right to extend the sentences for up to 5 years at a time, every 5 years. What makes Norway's prisons so great is that they only imprison 63 people per 100,000. Compare that to Portugal, 127, England, 140, Brazil, 299. It shows that Norway has something that works. And what makes their prisons so special is that the guards are not seen as guards. They're seen as social workers. They work alongside the men in the prison. They attend the workshops. They eat with them. They even do yoga classes with them. Prisoners are encouraged to build their own independence. They live as part of communities. They cook for themselves, they clean for themselves, and they go out and manage their budget and buy their weekly food shopping. What if we had a criminal justice system that had a prison system to lead a positive life for people with criminal convictions, to be the example that they can be? From Norway, you need to finish your prison sentence. So you've done quite a bit of time now in Norway. You've done a bit of time in the prison. And it's time to go to do the last 2 years of your prison sentence. And we're going to do our last 2 years of imprisonment in Brazil. Nice part of the world. Now, Brazil does have an imprisonment rate of 299 people per 100,000. That's huge. It's phenomenal. But necessity is the mother of innovation, as we say in the UK. And Brazil has come up with a system that heals itself. In fact, they run prisons, there's 49 prisons in Brazil that are run absolutely by prisoners and volunteers from the local community. There are no guards and no prison officers in these prisons. These prisons run at a third of the cost and still embody the values of the Norwegian prisons, which is centered around work, education, and family links. What if we had a criminal justice system where prisons and prisoners were encouraged to lead on their own rehabilitation and trusted to do so? Everyone in a prison in Brazil is called a recuperando, and as we're in Portugal, we might know that word. It's a person in recovery, because like Portugal, Brazil sees people in prisons as needing support and help, not punishment. And I think that's something that we need to adopt in our whole criminal justice sector journey. So you've served a bit of time in Norway, and you've served some time in Brazil. It's now time to be released. This is a really daunting time for prisoners, very scary, very intimidating. But if you get released to a country like Singapore, you'll notice people wearing yellow ribbons. And the Yellow Ribbon campaign is so successful in Singapore that 9 in 10 Singaporeans recognize the Yellow Ribbon and the aims and the values of the initiative. The aims are simple: to let prisoners and prison leavers know that there is a second chance. They believe that you'll be locked up by the walls of society when you're released from prison if they don't challenge it. So every year, They do a run around a prison. Members of the public can join. They raise funds. They see it as their community responsibility to rehabilitate people with convictions, to give them a second chance, to know that they are welcome back in their society. And Singapore has managed to reduce reoffending and got it down to a rate of 26%. Compared to England, which is 40-odd%, you can see how incredible that is. But Singapore is not even the best at it. They inspired Fiji, and Fiji adopted the values of the Yellow Ribbon campaign. And in 2006, their reoffending rate was at 50%. Fiji, after adopting the Yellow Ribbon campaign, managed to reduce their reoffending rate to 3.5% through community acceptance, adoption, and offering second chances. So what if we reduced reoffending from the community's perspective by offering a welcoming society that believes in second chances? Having served your sentence, having been released to Singapore, having been supported by the government to secure housing, to feel reintegrated into society, to access the services you need to access, it's now time to find a job. And we're going to go to England to find our job. England is currently faced with our lowest record level of unemployment at 3.8%. Employers are desperate for talent, and they've turned to the criminal justice sector to actively recruit people with criminal convictions before release and when they're released into the community. Employers are now benefiting, meeting their targets, keeping commerce going by recruiting people with criminal convictions. Our government believes in this so much that they formed an organisation called the New Futures Network, which works with employers and prisons to bring the two together, to influence education in the prison, to offer employment to people whilst they're in custody, and most importantly, offer them a job before they're released. Imagine that. Imagine knowing that you're coming to the end of your prison sentence and you have some meaningful activity waiting for you out there. Some activity that will pay the bills, will give you a chance to get your own accommodation and not rely on the state, pay taxes and contribute to society and not take from it. These are the values of the New Futures Network. But England's also going one step further, and we've adopted a campaign called Ban the Box, where employers remove the tick box from their application form and no longer ask, do you have a criminal conviction at the first stage? Over 150 employers have signed up to this campaign. It equates to hundreds of thousands of jobs where people with criminal convictions can be given a second chance to secure employment. What does all of this mean if it's not put into the perspective of someone's story, into a true criminal's story? A criminal like Derrick. Derrick has been in prison for 7 years of the last 10 years, doing 3 different sentences. He'd worked most of his life. After developing a common cold, it led to further complications and he needed a heart transplant. The medication he needed to recover from the heart transplant was made to last 2 years, but when that ran out, the need to medicate did not. Derrick started using heroin. And when the funds to pay for the heroin ran out, Derrick ended up selling heroin. Derrick was arrested and, as I said, in and out of prison for the last 10 years, a total of 7 years. Imagine, where were you 10 years ago? Imagine 7 years of that being inside a prison cell. Begs to differ. It's an odd question to think about. And Derrick thought there was no hope. And one day he was in his prison cell and he felt he had a big slap around the back of the head and he just said, I need to turn my life around. He got out of prison last year and he applied for a job with our organisation. Derrick is now in full-time employment, and since securing his job, he's been able to pay his bills and see his kids again. But what if Derrick never had to go through the prison system? What would our criminal justice system have looked like for Derrick? Well, first and foremost, his drug addiction would have been sorted in Portugal. When he went to Norway, he'll have been rehabilitated and supported by the governors and the guards in the prison. And by the time he was released to Singapore, he wouldn't have had to have worried about finding a house or finding extra support for his problems because the government would have supported him in doing that. Derrick pulled himself up by his shoes and managed to get himself a job and turn his life around. In fact, Derrick's now a qualified tutor, dedicating every day to supporting other people with criminal convictions to turn their life around. And I think that's absolutely incredible and extremely powerful. So when I asked the question of what if we worked with criminals to make society safer, I don't think that's the right question. The question is, what if we worked with people like Derrick to make society safer? Thank you.